What's up? It's Lukey, and I'm back, and you might notice that Dakota isn't with me. Well, Dakota's a bozo, and he has to work today. So I'm going to let my guest, who I think you're a vibrant, upcoming Twitter personality, upcoming media member. Why don't you introduce yourself so I don't, you know, say everything wrong and stuff.
So yeah, I'm Andrew. Some people call me Tocker. Some people call me Tokaru. Mainly on Twitter. Have our own podcast, Championship Rounds podcast, and yeah, that's about it really. I'm just sat on Twitter tweeting about boxing.
Yeah, that's my kind of people, people that are just like, hey, I really like boxing. Let me just go find people on the internet to talk about it with. Let's just kind of run through the things as boxing guys. What did you think of Thurman coming back?
It's weird because when you sort of say someone's a shot fighter after a third round knockout, it's weird. But to me, that just looked like a shot fighter. I'd seen Brock Jarvis multiple times before, and yeah, he's not. He. As soon as that fight got announced, I said, yeah, that fight's Thurman stopping him inside 5, whatever happens. And yeah, it's weird. I just don't think in activity age he's essentially come back for a big payday against someone levels below him.
I just don't see the same enthusiasm. And I've been around boxing, sadly, a long time. So, like, now it feels like it was like 2 years ago. But I remember when he was taking the Quintana fights and he was talking about moving to 154. And then I'm going to go on my championship run. And then it was burn money. I got an Owen, I'm not afraid to go. And then he was a pound for pound fighter, beating Porter and Garcia. And then he basically didn't fight. And during that not fighting period, it felt like a bit of that kind of young, angry, talkative fighter died, and it felt like that was kind of his fighting spirit. Like the way he talked leading into fights mirrored how he fights. Now I see a guy who can move, he can still punch, but he doesn't quite do it the same. It's not as dynamic, it's not as explosive, and even his pre-fight antics aren't as compelling.
Yeah, it's a weird one, man. He was the guy, and then he just sort of didn't fight, and Spence became that guy. It's really weird, and you can say he fell out of love with it and made his money and got out, or you can say it's just a really weird one. He was so good. That's the thing about him. Like those wins, man. Garcia, Porter. He was so good. He was sort of a top 10 fighter in the sport at that point.
I mean, he's trending to be, and this sounds like hyperbole, but he's trending to be in that Andre Ward zone. Like that was right when Ward had crossed over and people were like, dude, this guy's really good. He felt like he was the next guy that was going to be the next great welterweight after Floyd Mayweather. And then, like I'd said on my newsletter, and like you just said, he basically doesn't fight for 2 years, and Errol Spence catches up to him, wins a belt in 2019. He doesn't fight from 2017 to 2019. He fights Josecito Lopez. And it was really an uninspiring comeback. And it's like he's never really gotten that momentum back from that Josecito Lopez fight.
Yeah, and I don't know, it's just weird. And he sort of loses to Pacquiao, and you think, here's what it is, it's Pacquiao, even a sort of faded version. Then it's another sort of 3 years, and then he comes back with Barrios, just for Tank. He's a big name. That was a pay-per-view headliner, I believe, if I'm remembering that correctly. And then he just doesn't fight again for 3 years. Then obviously the Zoo thing, and you're thinking, which is ironically the fight they're trying to do now. Zoo, yeah, it's just weird, man. That fight falling off. Then he's coming back a year later, and that fight's significantly smaller now than it was for multiple reasons.
I think that you've summarized it good just with Keith Thurman, career is weird. And if you've been watching boxing for over 10 years and you saw where he was at, like 10 years ago, maybe 9 years ago, I'm not looking at the dates exactly, but after he beats Sean Porter, you would assume, man, this guy is going to take it to the Hall of Fame and he's going to really matter. And it's strange or weird how you say that we're talking more about how he hasn't kind of fulfilled his potential as opposed to like beating Brock Jarvis on a Wednesday in Australia.
And that sort of shows you as well. if he was just a normal guy that was just a standard world champion, nobody would care. Nobody would care about this sort of fight if he was just a standard guy. It was because he's so good that people are talking about it, that we're talking about it. Because he was that guy.
I thought he was an ATG. I thought he was an all-time great, and I thought he was destined to fight Spence. And it's crazy to me that they never met. You know, like that just felt like a natural fight. Let's jump over to the Kenshiro Teraji. I'm not even going to attempt to say the guy's last name. What did you think of this fight? I have to admit, I watched it like a day or two later because I actually forgot. I was busy looking at taxes and stuff, and like I totally can miss a Thursday card. Call me not as hardcore of a guy anymore, but I mean, sometimes life can overtake you on these. But you know, Kenshiro, I'll just give you my layman analysis. Really fun fighter. It's also hard for me to separate that if he was a middleweight, he probably would get hit with big punches and it wouldn't work as well. Like maybe that I'm in the wrong there, but it's hard for me to differentiate that or put him as a pound for pound fighter just because I don't see that style working as well. But I mean, in terms of an action fight, once again, one of the most compelling fights I've seen all year.
Yeah. Akui, that's how you say his name. Saigo Yuri Akui. It's a weird one because with Kenshiro, it's all his jab. He gets hit too much, and that's a problem, and it has been a problem. But it's all his jab. If you can stop him doubling up his jab and tripling up his jab, you'll have success. That's what Cazares did. That's what Ibuki did. That's what Kiyoguchi failed to do, and that's what every time Kenshiro threw out a jab in those early rounds, Akui fight over the top of it. And that's why it was such a good fight, because Akui's landing these huge right hands over and over again, and Kenshiro's firing back, and they just stood at mid range firing off on each other. And I don't know, as soon as I think it was the 6th round, Kenshiro throws a hellacious amount of punches, and then you're just thinking the tide's starting to turn a little bit. But Akui comes back, and it's back and forth, and then yeah, the stoppage was weird, I thought. I don't know about you.
I mean, I'm so, how do I say this? I don't want to say not invested because that just sounds bad, but like I was watching this and I'd kind of known the result, and I'm so used to having that happen that I was waiting to see when the stoppage happened. So when you're looking for when the stoppage is going to happen in the sequence of action, and you're kind of looking at it like a surgeon rather than in real time, I didn't love the stoppage, but it's also like both guys were getting hit, and it was a strain. It felt like if I watched it in real time, I might have had a better judgment of how the fight was going, and it might have really been a judgment call that I didn't like in the heat of the moment. But coming back, revisionist history, kind of knowing the result, I didn't have that ability to suspend disbelief kind of with the stoppage.
Yeah, I get you. Watching it live, I thought that's bad. And then you sort of see Akui sort of almost collapses in the corner, and he's down for a while, and he's all over the place. And then you sort of see how bad he was swelled up at that point as well. And it's sort of like, it was bad in isolation, but I think with context of what happened after, it was probably okay. Probably quite
I mean,
a good
they
stoppage.
both got hit a lot, man. And that's
Yeah.
like I mean, when you're in these lower weights, right? The flyweight division, what was his name? Zhao Shiming. I feel like his fights were very scary because he didn't have enough power to knock guys out, but he'd land a lot of shots. And it's like, as a referee, I feel like it's kind of like a writer. If you're a boxing writer, you never want something to fascinating happen when you're on coverage. You want it to be like a 120, 108. So you can kind of just, get in, get out, file your story. It's like, I feel like a referee always is going to kind of be like very worried about how are these punches adding up for a flyweight, because the power isn't going to he's not going to hit him and put him out. And I think that with these lower weight classes, when so many clean shots land, I think there is a safety component where the referees are maybe a little more prone to stepping in than the higher weights. That's just kind of like me putting an editorial to it.
Yeah. I agree. And it was a really, really good fight. Like, probably it's between that and the Isaac Cruz fight for my leading fight of the year.
I mean, those are good ones, right? And if like those don't win, then we have a very good year. I'm still waiting for that one fight of huge consequence that kind of gets to that point, you know? Because the Cruz Fiera fight, I knew it was going to be good just because kind of like the styles and the pride going in. I feel like Kenshiro Teraji, every chance he has a fight to be in a good fight, every chance he has a chance to get knocked out because he's just there to be hit. And as he goes up in these weight classes, it's fascinating to see his evolution as a fighter because he's not really evolving too much. He hops in, hops out, hits guys, but really his evolution is toughness and, you know, some great traits. But I get what you're saying. It's one of the best fights. It's hard because Japan has had a great run of boxers, especially with Naoya Inoue, one of the best fighters in the world. That being said, guys like Kenshiro, I think, have been a little under the radar and in the shadow of Inoue. While Inoue's gotten the shine, I feel like Kenshiro is definitely not a household name in America. He's more like, oh, I think I've heard of him.
Yeah, a lot of that is he was chasing the title defense record at 108 and wasn't really in the meaningful fights. He had the Alvarado fight, the unification that fell apart. He had the Bomba Gonzalez fight that fell apart. He's had some of it's his own fault, some of it's unfortunate, bad luck. But yeah, he's only really now in the last sort of probably 2022. 2022, like, is when he's really started having the real meaningful fights. The Kiyoguchi fight, Odasquaga fight, that turned out to be pretty meaningful after the fact, given what Odasquaga's done. And then the Akui fight, like the unifications, the big fights, like a lot of it was a lot of good wins, but like a lot of not so good wins and just sort of ticking over the title defenses pre-COVID. And it's just like, yeah, you're not going to stand out when you've got Aoka, Inoue, obviously, Nakatani, all these guys, sort of, you're not going to stand out, especially at 108 as well.
I think it's also like a rough era too, where it's like you got Jesse Bam Rodriguez. You've got like a lot of guys like right around your weight class that are having like generational performances, and he's at weight classes. It's kind of I kind of view him like my guy Oscar Collazo, where it's like Collazo's this really great fighter, but I just have no clue how good he is. Like I have no relationship to any other fighter in his division.
Because I'm a nerd, like I watched the knockout CP Freshmart's previous fight, and like I was pretty confident Collazo would stop him. I thought it'd be closer than that, but like, yeah, like there's not a lot of depth at minimum weight. Collazo's a very, very good fighter, and to be honest, like move him up to 108. Try and fight somebody at 108. Try and fight somebody at flyweight, because like there's just no depth there, and like you're never gonna break through, even at sort of a flyweight breaking through level, which is totally different to sort of a middleweight breaking through level, if that makes sense. You're never going to do that at minimum weight.
I get what you're saying, man. And I think that like Kenshiro is obviously one of the 15 best fighters in the world based on what he's accomplished, right? Now, like the key word is something you said, meaningful fights. He needs to get into fights that impact the world, that generate excitement, that match his skill set. And I guess my fear is his skill set is also based around getting hit, which means there's a shelf life to how long he can be at this highest level.
Yeah, he said he wants Bam Rodriguez. Bam Rodriguez knocks him out in about 4 rounds because Kenshiro is smaller and he gets hit way too much, and the power didn't have as much of an effect at flyweight as it did at light fly. Ioka probably outboxes him. That's another fight he's looking at. But yeah, I think he should stay at flyweight. I think there's, regardless of who you fight, an undisputed champion means something, and I think that's the route. Fight Odasquaga, fight the Ayala Ibuki winner. But yeah, he's 33. He's had a long career. He's definitely on the slide. But yeah, it is what it is. He's been a really good fighter for a long time.
He's one of those, like, I'm trying to contextualize his career, right? And it's like I don't want to like look at the end of his career and make that the judgment of his whole career. And I've followed along bits and pieces, but like his fights come on at 3 a.m. West Coast time. So I mean, I have to pick my shots. I don't always get to see these fights, and you try to. Now, it hit on the undercard because I missed it, but I actually followed your Twitter account and I read recaps of this. Give me your take of the undercard, because I think you might be the most well informed of this undercard. Seems like you had passionate, deep beliefs on this.
Yeah. Hiroto Kiyiguchi, bit of a backstory, was the ring champion at 108, was signed by Reynoso and Matchroom, was an IBF champion at 105, sort of moves up to 108 after the 105, obviously. Has a unification with Kenshiro, gets stopped in that fight and dominated, moves up to flyweight. People are saying he's done. He's not looking brilliant. Gets horrifically, and I mean horrifically, robbed against Williams-Patr. It's one of the worst decisions I've ever seen. Rematches him, beats him. Comes into this Olasquaga fight, and just comprehensively outboxes him. And he got dropped on the cards again. Horrific. Olasquaga's a good fighter, but he's one of these guys, he can't punch and move at the same time. And Kiyiguchi's had this sort of reputation of just standing in range and swinging out of people. And that's sort of that if he did that against Olasquaga, he would have got knocked out. But he didn't. He kept moving, he kept popping in and out, kept offsetting Olasquaga. Olasquaga got credited with the knockdown in the 11th, which just blatantly wasn't one. Kiyiguchi swings himself off his feet and just falls over. But yeah, 118, 109, one of the cards. That's no, that didn't happen.
Yeah, I literally just met Anthony in a gym about 7 years ago, and I didn't ever know where he was going. He beat up a guy that people said was good. Remember him from the Olympic trials. I tried to watch this fight. I just couldn't do it. I got too busy. I read your account. It's disappointing to hear it went like that. I think the thing with Anthony, for me, and I can't say his last name, the Princessa, is to me, he was always going to learn on the job as a pro, but there's not a lot of depth in these lower weights. And, I'm not opposed to seeing a guy have a hard fight or struggle in a fight. Now, obviously, I got to go through and see how I feel about the outcome, because we might have differing opinions, whatever. But I think that what's good about the lower weights, and here, let me give you an uninformed opinion that really doesn't matter at all, is you actually get people gaining experience at the highest level. So, okay, he maybe this fight didn't go his way, but he actually took a fight that could actually advance him and get experience. Whereas I see a lot of guys in his position not fighting for belts and kind of taking meaningless or fights where their size and ability can take over fights. I think the positive of what draws me to the lower weights is guys get higher level experience quicker, and it's almost like a real sport, meaning that you can bounce back and be in a good fight relatively quickly.
Well, yeah. Olasquaga took the Kenshiro fight on 10 days' notice.
Something like that.
Dropping down the division. Dropping down from flyweight to 108. Like, yeah. Then he fights Magramo, I can't say his first name. Magramo, who Nakatani beat for his first world title. Solid fighter, Magramo. Has a tough fight there. Takes on Rico Kanu for the vacant WBO at flyweight. Brutal. One of the best knockouts last year. Punches away the guard and sort of a left shovel sort of shot. Sort of half uppercut, half hook. Knocks him clean out. And then, yeah. The Bomber Gonzalez fight was weird. Sort of Gonzalez quits on a head clash in the first round, and it gets ruled a no contest at the time. And the JBC overruled it and said it's a TKO. So that was weird. And then it's like, yeah, this fight, it's like he's a good fighter, but there is flaws there. And he's learning on the job. He's in a really, really good gym. Getting work with Nakatani like all the time. Rudy Hernandez is a good coach, but like, yeah, he's a good fighter. But yeah, he lost that fight. To be honest with you, like he just lost it.
Rudy's my guy, man. I love hearing from Rudy. But anything we should know about the opening bout? I saw a title change hands. Anything consequential there that hardcore fight fans should know?
not really. Rene Santiago just comprehensively outboxed Yukichi Iwata, who lost to Bomba Gonzalez. Iwata had a lot of hype turning over, turned pro in America. Big puncher, but he just doesn't set up his shots and plods around the ring, following people and people that can sneak around the perimeter of the ring and pot shot him, beat him, and that's what happened. There was a rumor on Twitter that Santiago's now in talks with Eric Rosa for a unification WBA champion. But yeah, who knows if that will happen? I hope it does. But yeah, he just a watter, just followed him around and couldn't pin him down, couldn't cut the ring.
Okay, so if people are really excited about knowing what happened there, I think you summed it up for the 5 people listening or hearing it. Nick Ball, he gets a win over TJ Doheny, obviously an Inoue opponent. Pretty clear it's like a comparison fight, at least to me, because like if you look at it right at featherweight, Nick Ball is the smallest featherweight, even though he's like a little meatball. Inoue might match up in terms of height and size the best with Ball. What did you take away from this? The kick heard round the world, and do you think he could be an Inoue opponent, given that on social media there were little bits of talks or hints, wink, wink? What are your thoughts?
Firstly, I think one of the interesting things happened on Friday. I think Ball looked terrible weighing in. Had bad cut or whatever it was. I just think he looked terrible on the scales. But yeah, the kick, like I've said it enough times, A-side privileges. If Doheny does that, it's at least a point deduction, probably a 2-point deduction, maybe a disqualification. Ridiculous, just ridiculous. You just can't do that. You can't just start kicking people, and you can't start throwing people around. But yeah, I thought Doheny was boxing really well, but there was just an air of inevitability about it, if I can get my words out. But yeah, Ball was breaking him down, even if he was losing a few rounds. He was getting broken down.
Yeah, I mean, look, Doheny's a very good fighter to me. I think he's always going to be underrated. I think he's at this point in his career, former title holder, but I think a lot of people look at him as a journeyman. He provides a tougher test than that. But as you said, Nick was breaking him down. I think that the thing with me with Nick Ball is there's a little bit of a temperament that I'm not sure how he would do in an Inoue fight or in a true 50-50 featherweight fight. And that temperament came out with the kick. You talk about being the house fighter or being the guy that shows around and there's no point deduction because it's boxing, right? That stuff happens. But I also look at like when a fight doesn't go his way, how is his mentality going to be? Because like to me, that show like a lot of the really great fighters don't let you in. They don't let you in interviews. They don't let you in fight week. And to me, there was a concern that something wasn't going his way in this fight, and his adjustment was by any means necessary, which I don't know if that works at the next level.
He did the same versus Vargas. He started throwing Vargas around the ring, and he lost the first 6 rounds of that fight for me. That's a very, very close fight. A draw. There's talk of the robbery in that Vargas fight. I had it a draw. Draw was totally fair in that fight. Yeah, he starts throwing Vargas around. One of the knockdowns in that Vargas fight wasn't a knockdown. He threw him. And yeah, like I get what you're saying. He's been I'm supposed to be that sort of short and that stocky at that weight. You're gonna have to sort of employ those sort of tactics to be competitive.
I mean, the Vargas fight was a tough hang, right? It's like Vargas to me clearly won a solid grouping of rounds. And then Ball kind of did that thing where he made it exciting at the end. And you get kind of loud voices going, man, he clearly won. Because the rounds he won were more entertaining and they were kind of towards the end. It's like what you get scared. I equate it to like when an underdog overperforms against a guy that you expect to blow someone out. Magically, the underdog, even if you run 4 rounds out of 10 rounds, he probably won 6 on someone's scorecard because they didn't expect him. So they're like a 50-50 round can swing that way. But I think it's interesting to chart the progress of Nick Ball because he's staying active. He's a compelling figure. But I really don't know if he can hold a belt for 2 to 3 years. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. It's strange when I see a champion and I'm not really sure what to make of the legacy component of his career.
Yeah, it's weird, but it's weird football, man. He's good, but like his two most meaningful fights, the Vargas fight and the Ford fight, a lot of people don't think he won either. There's an argument he didn't win either of those.
Is that the name of this show? It's weird. Like Thurman and Ball, like both are in weird. They're very different, but it's like Thurman's a Hall of Fame type fighter who had a weird career. Nick Ball is a fantastic fighter, but his career is weird because, like you said, two of his biggest fights, you could say he lost.
Yeah, and he keeps fighting super bantamweights. His most complete performances are against super bantamweights. Lamati was a super bantamweight. Isaac Dogbo, really a super bantamweight. He's been at featherweight a couple of years, but he's really a super bantamweight. And then Rios and Doheny. I don't know. I think I've got to be honest. I think Inoue would have his way with Ball. I think the way Ball squares up and charges in, and the way Ball is so open to body shots all the time. He's a magnet for those body shots. I think Inoue would stop him pretty comfortably.
It's a fight I'd like to see, though, just because it would be something that's interesting. But I also think that Inoue against Ramon Cardenas is going to be a harder fight than people think. Maybe I'm in an island there, but I think that I just think that there's elements of boxers are not like Street Fighter characters. And after you take certain amount of fights and you change stuff up, you're not the same guy over and over. And sometimes you like, if this was Inoue in 2018, he'd beat Ramon Cardenas, it would be easy. But I mean, this is a guy who's been at the top of the sport for 7-8 years, and he's coming back to America. And I think the fight's going to be a lot harder, and Cardenas has no pressure on him. And that's a really great situation to be in if you're an aggressive puncher where everyone's expecting you to not do well. So, I mean, I'm not expecting that to be a smooth hang.
I think a few rounds it'd be close early on. But yeah, I just think as soon as you get to a sort of 4 or 5 rounds in, Inoue sinking those body shots against Cardenas, like, yeah, I think might be a little bit tricky for the first few, but once he's figured out, I hardly give Cardenas a chance in that fight, if I'm being honest.
Well, this is the compelling content when you get little bits of contrast. No one wants two guys sitting on their phones, just saying the same things. This is the conflict component that I think many people come to this riveting show for. Will said in the chat, Inoue should take the ball fight, straightforward way to become a champion at 126. For those who don't know, that's the featherweight division. Anything fascinating on this undercard people should know?
Don't watch Charlie Edwards against Andrew Kane. Just don't. In my sort of 15 years of watching boxing casually, sort of 8 or 9 years of watching it as a hardcore, one of the worst fights I've ever watched. And that's not hyperbolic. It was terrible. Yade Herrera, a lot of people might know him. He was in the running to fight Shakur Stevenson. Had a tougher than expected fight against the Mexican Macias. He's sort of the guy that was caught between styles. First few rounds, he's standing on the inside and throwing hard shots and just trading, and he's getting caught because he's standing upright. And then next couple of rounds, he's skirting around the outside of the ring like a typical Cuban was, just sort of tippy-tapping his way. And then once he started, implementing a bit of both, knowing when to stand in and trade, knowing when to skirt around, he separated himself massively. And yeah, he was a really good amateur. Lost the Reito Tatsumi in the Youth World Championships a few years ago. Really good amateur, and if he boxes like he was doing as an amateur, he'll be a very, very good fighter. Still only 22, lot to learn, but Yeah, good learning fight for him, I think. And it was entertaining whilst it lasted for the first sort of 3 or 4 rounds.
Well, there's an art to building a good professional, right? So it's like just because you're an amateur, it doesn't always translate right away. But it sounds like that's a figure to watch. When you said that, I wished I had have done my research on how Kevin Downtown Brown's fight went. I think he fought in Russia this week, or maybe it's next week. That's a Cuban boxer that I'll always remember his name watching the amateur fights because his name is Kevin Brown, and it just stood
Was
out to
that
me.
that was meant to be against Carrington Arborough, wasn't it? 'Cause that fight got called off, I think.
I don't even know. I had him
Yeah,
on a little spreadsheet where I was looking
yeah,
and I saw that Kevin Brown might be fighting, but I didn't see anyone talk about it. So I was,
yeah. The 140, yeah, the super lightweight. I think I know who
yeah,
you mean.
it's
Yeah,
I forget the weight class, but he's the guy that got dropped at a Caribe Royale show like a fight or two or maybe 3 ago. He got
I think.
dropped and went down. He was going life or death, but he's got this deep Cuban amateur pedigree, but he's not Andy Cruz. You're not going to be able to put him in a fight 4 or 5 fights. This is a guy that needs a little bit of development, but you're hoping that when he figures out kind of the pro style or what his version of a pro style is, that he can lean on his experience, his wealth of knowledge, and maybe make that jump.
Yeah, yeah. Also on the undercard, just quickly, Jack Turner, 23-year-old super flyweight, brutally knocked out Ryan Farag. Nice knockout. He can punch, Jack Turner, but he's a very, very aggressive puncher that's quite open. And when he steps up, I think he's going to get chinned. I don't like saying that, but I think he is. Because he's got no defense. He just runs forward and wants someone to take the power. But like he's going to be really, really fun to watch. He punches hard, he runs forward and just throws.
So where would you put him on the Jimmy Sands scale of coming forward?
That's a question I never thought I'd hear.
Well, when you come on this show as a guest, we give you we give you some really nerdy questions.
Right now, he's ahead of Jimmy Science. Jimmy Science is actually quite near from where my parents are from, or live. Sorry, but yeah, he's ahead because Ryan Farag is a former European champion, and he's the current Commonwealth champion. Like he's a sort of domestic title level guy. Jimmy Science is still in that journeyman phase, but yeah, I don't know. I think he'll be better than Science, but it's tough to tell at this stage.
They both kind of sound like the same guy. Really, really fun. Seem like great hangs outside of the sport.
Yeah.
Seems like you'd always want to watch their fights, but like they're kind of skipping that thing that you see all the great fighters do, which is not get hit. It's kind of that Kenshiro Teraji thing too, where you're like, it's hard for me to put Kenshiro on a pound for pound list because I just have never seen that many pound for pound guys get hit clean that well.
Yeah.
And it kind of to me defeats the purpose of if he was a heavyweight. I just don't think his style travels. I think his style is very weight class centric. But okay, I'm glad we got answers on that. Did you catch any of the Ammo Williams-Patrice Volney fight?
Yes, I did. So frustrating from Volney. So frustrating. He's technically really good. Got a really good jab, Volney. Technically, I thought a level above Williams, if I'm honest, but Williams threw everything at him, and Volney just didn't.
I was writing out the show notes, but I didn't know if you were going to go on a heater. I actually watched this one pretty intently, and I agree with what you're saying, right? So we're gonna. That's pretty boring. Everyone's like,
Yeah.
man, that is such a boring take that you agree with him. I think that Williams is a fighter who grew up with a lot of coordination, athleticism, and power, and he was able to skip basic things. And he even got to a national amateur level without having to do basic things like keeping his hands up for long periods of time and stuff. And he's having to kind of learn these things as a veteran fighter, which may or may not happen. But Patrice Volney, it's strange. He has like a sparring partner mentality. There's no sense of urgency. It's almost like he's in there working with a guy, and then he'll catch him with a shot in the round. He doesn't basically throw enough punches to win rounds at a high level to me, unless he catches an eye-catching shot. And I saw the will of Williams win the fight. It wasn't like technique or talent. It was just that he was willing to throw more punches, and it was he wanted to win, while Volney was content to follow him around and fight at a pace he was most comfortable with.
You've been reading my tweets, haven't you? Because that's exactly what I was saying.
Well, I actually didn't read your tweets, but I'm glad we're on the same page there, because it was, to me, what I saw with Volney was like, in his head, it was a moral victory to land a big shot. So if I land a big shot that moves his head back, I therefore landed the biggest shot. I won the round. Whereas Williams was like, let me outwork him. And I think that it was a fight I thought had the chance to be a fight of the year. And it really sizzled. I think it was a solid win for Williams, but it's one of these ones where I didn't learn anything about Williams. It's just Volney's never going to go to that next level for me.
Yeah, like Volney's jab couldn't miss over that sort of lowish left hand or right hand, sorry, that Williams has, and it's a weird one. It's like it's my favorite word today, but yeah, Williams just hasn't learned that Shiraz's fight. He ate so many jabs and he's making the same fundamental mistakes, but he wants it. And sometimes that's like at that sort of level. If you just want it, you can go and win. There was a moment, I think it was the 10th or 11th. Volney catches him with a left hook, and Williams was stunned. He was sort of visibly stunned, and then Volney just doesn't throw a punch for 30 seconds, and you're thinking, follow up. This is really close. You might be down there. Like, follow up, do something. A knockdown could be crucial. Hurting him more could be crucial, and he just doesn't. In the 12th round, he almost showed up the whole thing. And it's like, I don't know, man. He was technically better, but Williams just wanted it. He had that desire to win. And yeah, it's just frustrating. Like, and it's weird because he's usually a guy that's really strong late, and he has a really good engine, Volney. But he just didn't. He just didn't have
I
it
think
in
that's
him.
Williams' power, though. I think Williams, one thing we know is he can hit pretty decent. Shout out to my guy Martin Mulligan in the chat. Turner looked really good. I think he will go far. Ammo was a bit easy to hit. I mean, Williams has always been easy to hit. Like, that's something that never, but he hits hard. Not to be a dick to our chat. Like, I'm not like, hey buddy, like that. No, like, I mean, I think that wasn't and I get what you're saying. I think, to me, Volney reminds me of Arthur Abraham, both the good and the bad. And he looked like the bad Arthur Abraham in this fight. The Arthur Abraham against Zordo Ramirez, the Arthur Abraham who just walks around, can't cut the ring off, and is just in front of you, and he is looking to land a power shot, and he throws like what feels like 50 punches in a 12-round fight. When he's really good, he lands shots, and all of a sudden you can't exchange. I just was disappointed with Volney not throwing a jab. And honestly, I was disappointed with Williams, who had a guy who wasn't really throwing, not dictating the fight enough. So, like, I was kind of disappointed in both performances because I felt like neither guy separated enough, and Williams did enough to win, but there wasn't really a separation. It was like a 60-40 every round.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, it was a good enough fight. I enjoyed it, but like it's one of those ones where you're just screaming at your telly to just throw the jab, throw something, and like you're tearing your hair out saying you can just see the openings are there, and he's just not throwing it. And like, yeah, maybe it's the power, like you said, but man, you've got to be willing to take something in that situation. For me, anyway, I know it's easy for me to say, sitting here, but like. Yeah, it's really disappointing in Volney, man. Like, yeah, he could have won that fight, and he'll be kicking himself that he just didn't. When he watches it back, he'll be kicking himself.
That's what separates guys. On the undercard, we had 3 consequential fights. My guy Edgar Berlanga gets a first-round knockout. It was not the greatest opponent, but I do like that Berlanga did what he was supposed to do. We could talk about the weight and whatever, but I think that, I think he was disappointed not being the main event. However that came about, he gets a first-round knockout over an opponent that, isn't on his level. I view Berlanga as like a top 10 level fighter. I think that some people don't because of the hype around him, but I think he has a lot of God gifts, and I think he had to kind of do those developmental prospect fights from 10 to 15 most guys have in main event fights, like because he was knocking everybody out. So when he went to that next level, the world saw him in those kind of contender prospect, the elevate fights that a lot of people, except for us nerds, don't watch. So Berlanga gets a win. Omari Jones, there's a lot to like. I've liked him since the Olympics and the amateurs. He's my guy. Talked to him a lot. Good combination. I mean, when you see a pro debut of an Olympian, right? It's not like we need to go, oh man, those punch selection, this and that. It's like he's probably going to have a lot of athletic gifts over these guys, size, physicality. But what I liked was he put on a show. He did what he was supposed to do, and he got the crowd excited for him. Those are promising. And Jermaine Ortiz had an all right performance, but it really didn't stand out as notable. Those are kind of my thoughts. Was like Jermaine Ortiz is, really disappeared since that Teofimo fight. And I was really hoping he'd make a statement. Instead, it was just it was an all right win, but it really didn't make me clamor to see him in with a champion.
Yeah, I didn't see the Ortiz fight, but I saw the other two. Omari Jones, fantastic fighter, fantastic amateur. Was unlucky in the Olympic semi-final. I say unlucky. It could have easily gone his way. It wasn't a robbery, but it was a very, very
I
close
scored
fight.
it for him, but I'm
Yeah,
biased. I know him, so like it's
yeah,
like, if you know a guy, you probably are like
yeah.
the worst judge of him. Like I thought Jamal Harvey won his fight too, and a bunch of people are like, no, that didn't happen.
But yeah, that was close. Wasn't a robbery. It was close. He could have easily won that fight. But yeah, he's a really good amateur, man. Beat Nishant Dev, beat a lot of guys. And yeah, really, really good fighter. It's good that he's back out on the NS undercard. A lot of these guys, it's activity, and yeah, like you said, he did what he was supposed to do in getting rid of guys, and that's always a worry for like these amateurs, because a lot of them can be happy to sit in first gear. That makes sense.
He's got a lot of traits to me of Errol Spence, and it's not the way he fights, but the way he carries himself and the championship pedigree he holds himself to. What I liked was a lot of times amateur fighters, let me compare him to someone he doesn't fight like at all. This will be really fun for people. He kind of reminded me of Andy Cruz when I first saw Andy Cruz turn pro, where they don't fight at all the same, but it's rare that you see an amateur with no fights or one fight that's willing to throw combination punches against a veteran opponent. And that was what got me excited here was when he knew this guy was hurt, he put punches together. He wasn't just staying on the outside. He was like, I know my distance and range. He hits him with his distance. He's like, there's the stick. Follow, follow, follow. How can I put damage on him? And I think that's very promising that early on he's adapting like that.
Yeah, and like you say, like he's a really good fighter, man. Like the amateur pedigree there. Yeah, there's not much else I can say with that really. Like he's really, really solid. Like, yeah, Matchroom have got one there. Matchroom have got one, and they've missed out on a couple, but they've got one there.
So my next guest flaked on me, so I'm going to try to persuade you to break down some fights fairly quickly, and then we're going to plug. If not, then I'm going to do it by myself. But
Oh
yeah, well, I didn't discuss it with you, so it could have been Lukey all by himself here. You don't really know yet. I was like, you're a big boxing guy, and it might be fun to get you on. And you have a great podcast, the Championship Rounds podcast. And I think it's anyone that listens to my show, I think should go over, because I think there's a similar type of hardcore boxing nerd that would enjoy your unique stance on it. So I think that's cool for people like my guy Martin Mulligan in the chat. He's here for all the great boxing chat every week, Lukey. Well, you might have another show to throw in the mix, the BTR Boxing Podcast. Of course, you got to listen to that every week. You got to listen to my show every week because you got to make me feel relevant. But try out the Championship Rounds podcast. I know I'm just talking too much, but Fundora Booker, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I appreciate those kind words, but Fundora Booker, it's a random fight. You're reading it and you're like, that Booker, the one that got stopped by Williams, and you're like, yeah, it's like, that's weird. I didn't like it. I still don't really like it that much. There's a lot of good fights at 154, and that's really not one of them. But the more I've sort of thought about it, the more I've watched Booker, I've reminded myself. I just think I'm probably a little bit outspoken on this. I just don't think Fundora's that good. He's a very, very good world level fighter. But unified champion level good, really?
Let me get your back on this. I think I know what you're saying. So let me translate your things, because I think I'm thinking what you're thinking, but I don't want you to get caught by like the mean internet trolls that are waiting. They're under the bridge. They're ready to attack you, you know. I think what you're saying is Sebastian Fundora is a fighter who has a lot of flaws, but he's 6'6" and he hits really hard. And we saw him get knocked out by Mendoza, and there's a lot of questions about where he sits at the highest level, whether it's durability, whether it's does he have longevity. He had that hard fight with Erickson Lubin. So I think that what you're saying is this is a guy who holds 2 belts in a very, very good division. So by default, you'd think a two belt titleist would be the best guy. And in many ways, this is a guy that I think when you look at the title holders, you have the most questions, because in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, Tim Tszyu was on the way to beating him and stopping him before the elbow happened.
Yeah.
And Fundora's adjustment was simply that an accidental foul occurred and Tim Tszyu didn't stop the fight for a no contest. And then that changed the course of the fight. I didn't see him making an adjustment. I still think he's a great fighter, but I'm not really sure how versatile Fundora is. So let me go back to you. But is that kind of what you were saying?
Yeah, you've worded that well. But yeah, he has got that tall man syndrome. You saw it with Gary Cully a few fights ago. You saw it with Fundora 2 fights ago. Where when they take a shot clean, you always worry a little bit. And yeah, Booker's a sneaky guy, man. He lands clean. He's got a really nice he sort of slips, jabs, and fires a left hand over the top of him. And it's a really nice shot. And I think if he catches Fundora clean with that,
I'm going to steal your thunder. I think Booker's going to beat him. I really do.
I wouldn't be shocked. Like initially, like the sort of my thoughts were like, oh, why the hell has he got that fight? Da, 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 da. Like I said, the more I think about it, the more I think, could he? I don't know. But yeah, Fundora shipped a lot of punishment in that Tszyu fight. He broke a nose, whatever it was. His face was a mess. He's bleed. A lot of the blood in that fight came from Fundora's nose. But yeah,
we haven't seen him back in the ring. That was a very grueling fight. That wasn't just one-way traffic for a bad fight. Tim might never be the same from that fight. It's a big assumption that Fundora is going to be the same guy coming from that fight, because that fight was a taxing fight. And if you think about it, Mendoza and that fight, and then Lubin wasn't that long before that. So that's like 3 really, really hard fights. Booker's a guy who fought Conwell at the Olympic trials, lost, but he was at that level, gets stopped by Ammo Williams. Okay. There's always the chance that the first round could go terrible for Booker. But I do think there's going to be a snowball effect for Booker, where if he gets out of the first round, gets to the second round, he's going to be like, okay, I got this. And I do think a guy like that is going to mentally get stronger. He's playing with house money. And Fundora is really fighting with a lot of pressure, because think about the big money fights for him. I just feel like a lot of times when a talented, unknown fighter gets an opportunity, they typically win in the sport of boxing. And this feels like one of those moments.
I can see it. I can definitely see it. I just think, does Booker have that one-shot power to put him out? Does Fundора's volume, man, and like, I'm struggling, man. I'm struggling, to be honest with you. I don't know. I think probably Fundora overwhelms him a little bit. I don't know, but Booker's well scored. You can see that, and he can land clean shots, and he can nail you. And yeah, like I said, with Fundora, you're always worried about him getting chinned. He's just one of those fighters, these tall, lanky fighters, that you always have to worry about that.
I guess theme of the show, it's weird. He's a weird guy, and
my favorite word today.
His favorite word. And I also think Fundora has an element of the Kenshiro Teraji, right? Where he's a great fighter, but like I never feel 100% going with a guy where you're not sure what they're bringing to the table defensively. I'm not saying he's a bad defensive fighter, but like typically in world-class boxing, you don't see the guys that stay at the top get hit the way he's gotten hit in some fights.
Yep. And you don't see the guys stay at the top when they're that tall and have that much like body to hit, and they decide to walk on the inside and trade for some reason.
He's a video game character.
Yeah.
Like if you gave this to if you gave a 13-year-old a video game and said make a junior middleweight, Fundora is what they like, a guy that can throw a lot of punches, hits hard, and he's ridiculously tall. He's a video game character that a 13-year-old would create.
Yeah. I think, in fairness, I think that's one of the quote unquote adjustments he made in that Zoo fight. I think he did jab a little bit more, but like, I don't know, man. It's weird to me because I don't rate Fundora that highly, but he's in a position where he probably shouldn't be. He shouldn't have got that title shot in the first place, really. It's interesting.
Well, and it dates back to the first It's Weird guy, Keith Thurman, who originally was going to fight, and it just kind of shows you how weird boxing can be and how opportunities can be there. And then a guy that I think might be right up there with both of these guys, Sarai Boachuk, is now on the outside, but he was supposed to fight Fundora, and who knows how that fight would have played out.
I was pretty big picking Boachuk in that fight against Fundora. But yeah, who knows?
Undercard, just to hit on it, Jesus Ramos Jr., my guy. I love Jesus Ramos Jr. I think he's an uncrowned champion. He's really a great fighter. He's taking on Guido Scrum. It's a late replacement for Kevin Salgado, was originally. Now it's Guido Scrum. Scrum was a guy that I really had high hopes for. I saw a little bit of Maidana in him. He fought Jahairi Brown at a show I was at. And then, he goes to pro box, and he's just kind of underachieved with those guys that you kind of have to beat to get to that next level. And the way Vladimir Hernandez knocked him out, I just don't think you come back from those at the highest level. Like, I think it would take a very big effort from him to redefine where his career is going against arguably one of the 5 best fighters, in my opinion. And then the opener is Elijah Garcia versus Terrell Goucher. That's a pretty fascinating fight because Garcia on paper should win this fight, right? Young guys should beat, but he's coming off the Kyron Davis. Believe they've made changes in his camp. But Goucher is a former Olympian. He's an older guy. But if Garcia didn't fix those problems from the Kyron Davis fight, I could see this fight getting tricky.
Yeah. If he needs to learn to cut up the ring, and he needs to learn how to do something to stop a jab. Like, it's a common thing in boxing now. Nobody can defend a jab. Just slip a jab, parry a jab, do something, and he needs to cut off the ring. But I just think issue with Goucher, 37 at middleweight, he's a natural light middle. I just think the size and volume of Garcia will ultimately see him win the fight. But I think it'll be a good fight. I think he'll cause Garcia a bit of trouble early. But I just think Garcia is going to overwhelm him late, and probably I don't think he'll stop Goucher, but I think a pretty clear points win where he has some trouble first few rounds.
And if you're a super nerd, so of course, if you're listening to my show, you're a super nerd, you can get a Freddie Rojas, Maurice Lee undercard bout on this fight card too. I know everyone's ecstatic about that, but that actually kind of gets me excited. That hits my feel spot, seeing those type of names. George Kambosos is fighting this weekend. Should I care?
No. No. I'm going to be honest, no. He is fighting Duod Jordan. And I got told about this a couple of weeks before it was announced, and I was like, I swear I've heard of him before. And he lost to Anthony Crolla years ago. Like, I was still a teenager with before I did a lot of my exams at school. He beat Crolla. He lost to Crolla. Sorry, he lost to Chris John for a WBA title years ago, 2011. I just know, like, it's a sad indictment on Kambosos that you have to drop him to this level of opponent to get him a confirmed win, because they tried to do that with Maxie Hughes and it didn't work. He didn't win that fight. Don't care what the judges say. He didn't win that fight.
It was an ugly fight too. That was just.
Yeah.
I feel like that everyone looks at that as Maxie stepped up a level, even though Kambosos got the win. I feel like that elevated Maxie's career. It sounds like we can completely skip over this fight, pretend it's not happening. But there is a fight on the undercard I am interested in, which is Skye Nicolson versus Tiara Brown. That's an interesting fight, right? Because I feel like a lot of hardcore fight fans look at Tiara Brown as someone that's never gotten an opportunity, deep amateur pedigree, and as someone that's been overlooked, maybe by the politics of boxing, who knows? And then you have Skye Nicolson, who's an Olympian, very good pedigree, and is like becoming a star in women's boxing based on the ability to fight so often and on these cards. I think it's compelling that Nicolson took this fight. I believe there was a mandate of some sort, so it was forced. But I still think this is a really interesting fight, not just based on that I perceive it as an interesting 50-50 type matchup, but also the trajectories both fighters came on, that they also took like two different paths to get to this point.
Yeah. I'm going to be honest, I have never seen a Brown fight, but I've seen sort of Skye Nicolson fights, sort of all blend into one. It's the same thing. She's clearly a level above most of the girls she's fighting and just sits on the outside, jabbing. Her feet are a level above, her jabs a level above, her long straight shots are a level above. And it's just the same round after round. And yeah, you can see she's got talent, but it's like step it up a little bit. You know, like go on. Sorry.
Oh, no, I'm just interrupting you. I was just gonna say she reminds me of Demetrius Andrade. Like the way when Demetrius Andrade was developing as a young fighter on television, ESPN Plus fights or ESPN Friday Night Fights, there was obvious a level of talent, but there was also a level of like, I'm gonna do what it takes to win, and I'm not gonna really go. Skye doesn't seem to have that Omari Jones put the punches together and close out a show.
And yeah, I said that about these amateurs. A lot of them, they're just happy to sit in first gear. Because it's sort of tournament boxing. When you're fighting the next day, you don't want to overexert yourself, and you're winning easily. And you've grown up on that all your life, and yeah, you're just happy. And eventually, that will cost you when somebody can push the pace on you, and you need to up the gears, but you can't because you've not done it. You maybe could have done it if you were up in the gears against these level opponents, and you were used to going through the gears and really trying to put a dent in people. But like that goes with time. If you're so used to sitting in your comfort zone, that will go. And that's why I think it's so important for these fighters that are top amateurs and clearly a level above to try and go through the gears and get people out of there, or even hurt them, or even just up it, go through the gears. But yeah, I'm sort of expecting Skye Nicolson to win a fight, even though I haven't seen the opponent, because every fighter I've seen her against, she's been a level above.
Well, to me, this is her best opponent as a pro, and I think there's a good backstory here, and this is a real fight. And I was actually kind of surprised she took it, because like with her level of fame and the way her career is going, she really doesn't have to take this dangerous of a fight. So I think that speaks to me. What excites me about the fight is it shows a level of competitor in her, where she might be hearing some people going, "Oh, you don't want to fight her." And there's kind of the fighters I like are the ones that go, "Oh, you don't think I'll fight them? Let me fight them." Like the David Benavidez. "Oh, you don't think I'll fight Morrell? Let me make it." And I didn't know that she'd do that, but I think that really speaks volumes to where she can go in the sport if that's her mentality.
Yeah, I get you. Yeah, it's one of those. Yeah.
Any opinions on Cherneka Johnson, Nina Hughes?
Nina is literally about 10 minutes drive away from my parents' house. That's where she lives. Little town in Essex, just to the east of London. Yeah, she's old, and you'd have to say with your head that Johnson, like with youth on her side, home fighter, you'd think she'd sneak a decision, honestly. But Nina's had an interesting career. She's she almost missed the boat on the sort of big sort of the women's boxing boom in the UK. She was on small hall shows, fought her way up, won a world title, did really well. But like, I don't know, at her age, like, you are concerned, I think.
And also, I feel like this rematch is happening because the announcer messed up on the first fight and announced her as the winner, and then did the thing you should never do in a title fight. Whoops, you actually lost. So I feel like because that happened, there's like that forces a rematch, and it was a lot of people thought Nina won the fight. I thought Johnson won, but it was a classic. Do you favor volume or the punch? It was a perception fight. It was a very close fight. I'm intrigued in it. One other fight I wanted to get your opinion on. Are you interested in Joeshon James versus Lester Martinez?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. The pro box fight. I think that's really interesting. I favor Martinez based on volume and based on power, but I don't know. James is sneaky, man. James can make people look silly, but I just think, volume down a stretch. It's one of these fighters like Lester Martinez is relentless. He's so relentless. I don't know how the hell Gongora stood up to it. Insanely tough, man, and that probably should have been stopped by the corner. But Joeshon James probably has a good start, but end of the day, I think Martinez is going to overwhelm him, mate.
Let's have a not so deep discussion about both guys' willingness to take real fights. Joeshon James has fought 4 undefeated prospects, 2 draws, and upset 2 of them. And like you said with Lester Martinez, he fought ZWAP, Charles Conwell's, half brother, Isaiah Steen, early in his career. And then he's also fought Carlos Gongora, who I've always felt is a fringe top 10 fighter in the division, fights him very early. So, I mean, I think what's also interesting is like you're looking at the winner of this fight is potentially a title level challenger, even if the regular fan doesn't know. Like, I view the winner of this fight as real as a guy as Christian Mbili.
Yeah, I'd go along with that. Maybe Derevyanchenko in just pips Mbili ahead of him, but yeah, I agree. They're that sort of level. I think Martinez is probably the one that's slightly ahead of James at the minute. But a James win for Lester Martinez is big, and I'd say fringe to the top 10. They probably both about are. So it's a really interesting fight. It's one of the best fight of the
weekend. Fights. It's the best fight of the weekend, in my opinion. If you want to see a good fight, and I think that I could be biased, but I think Pro Box TV production kicks ass. I think it's always a great show. I think it's good broadcasting. I think it's lit well. I think there's a lot of great details there. It's going to be a fun show. And I think that both guys will probably fight for a title, barring something happening in their careers. And the winner is probably, like, what do you think, 2-3 fights away from a title shot?
It just depends what Canelo's doing, really. But in sort of regular circumstances, they'd be that sort of far away. I honestly, with the way the titles are at the minute, who knows? Plant's got the WBA interim, and Billy's going for a WBC interim. Iglesias is going for the IBF final eliminator. Pacheco might be going for a WBO interim. Like, it's a mess, and unfortunately for these two, they're sort of a little bit behind all of those guys. I think they'll challenge one of those guys, if that makes sense, when they get a title, probably in about 18 months, 2 years' time. But it's a mess right now.
What I'm hearing is these are the guys that are the most unfamous, and they take hard fights. So guys are like, man, I've clawed my way up. And the guy that I see fighting both of these guys is Iglesias, because he just takes real fights. So like, he seems like in this division a guy that's like, okay, you want to fight me? Cool, let's do it. And outside of him, I'm not saying other people don't, but with other fights, it looks as though maybe there's more hands in the pot, more promoters talking, more this or that, checking. Iglesias just feels like a guy where he's literally saying yes to anybody in front of him.
You're right, but also being sort of based in Germany for years and not really being known and fighting on Thursday nights sort of lends itself into that as well. You sort of have to. to make yourself known. You have to take the real fights if you're in their positions. Like Iglesias is a bit ahead of them, but they're sort of in the same position. They have to take these fights. And yeah, I think Iglesias is really, really good, man. He's so big as well for the weight.
He's scary, bro. He's scary. Like, he's a scary, scary guy.
I remember him. He had a fight in Poland for the IBF title, and he blasted this kid out away in 2 rounds. This was about 4 years ago. Like he's got this thing, like the hooks he throws. He's aiming for the top of your ear. He's aiming for the temple. He's aiming for these shots, and like that's how that Shevchenko knockout happened. Like he's aiming for like the temple, and he's so accurate with it. And he's big, he's strong, he's fast. But yeah, he's a really good fighter, and I hope he gets the Sadro fight. But yeah, like Martinez, James, really, really good matchup. Really good matchup.
I just feel like they're kind of like, they're the guys I'm drawn to. They're kind of old school fighters. And it's like Iglesias. I mean, I love Joeshon James because how many times can you see a guy take a B-side fight and he doesn't lose? And he's not out here talking about the politics of boxing. He's like, no, I'm one of the best fighters in the world. I'm going to fight. Like if you talk to him, he goes, I'm going to fight these guys at some point. I might as well fight them now. And that the level of confidence with him, and then Lester Martinez, he's with Bomac and them, and they're just, they're willing to throw him in. And I think that that's when the sport's healthiest, is when guys are just taking fights and they have this strong self-belief. So I'm more, not to say other fighters, because I think Diego Pacheco is the same exact kind of guy, and taking a Steve Nelson fight is a big one. But once you get close to those Canelo fights, it becomes a little bit strategy, right? Because you could land a Canelo fight. And I think that that's, like you said, to start this whole conversation, the division has gotten tricky because Canelo more than likely is going to have all 4 belts pretty soon. And then what does he want to do becomes where everyone goes.
Yeah, it's a controversial take I have. I've been thinking about this for
well, don't get me canceled. Trouble then.
I'll put it like this. Do you think an undisputed champion is good for the sport?
I mean, I personally don't like undisputed champions, having lived through this, because I think it's good for guys to get belts, to be able to leverage titles and to get more money. But I think it's pretty obvious who the best guys are. And I think at a certain point, the best fights should just make themselves based on interest. And I think going out of the way to get all 4 belts oftentimes just slows down and creates log jams that are very unnecessary in divisions.
I agree. Like, if Inoue wasn't undisputed, Akhmadaliev would have had a good fight in the last 2 years. If Billy against Pacheco was for a vacant title rather than a final eliminator, that would get made instantly. If like a lot of these fights that won't get made would have happened if there was a title on the line or some sort of, I think they're good as a sort of a last crescendo to sort of cap off an era. But then after that, I think they should splinter. Like look at Dubois, the interesting Dubois right now. That came from a strip title. Like, yeah. Anyway, so it's a different discussion, but yeah.
Well, I think that like I'm never mad at an interesting unification bout like Stanionis versus Boots Ennis, but I'm not interested when a guy's like, I'm only targeting only the champions to become undisputed, because there's always good contenders, and it seems like the good contenders have to wait and wait and wait, and then it just makes the sport less interesting, because then more often than not, we have guys taking kind of high level stay busy fights, and we're waiting on the top of the division.
Yep. And yeah, with a champion fighting, say, twice a year, that's not good. There's more than 2 guys in a division that deserve these shots. Like, it's just, yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting topic, but I don't think they're particularly brilliant, especially when you hold them for a long period of time.
Well, thank you for coming on today. Do you want to promote yourself or anything like that? I quite had fun talking boxing with you. I love nerding out, and hope you had a good time. And if you didn't have a good time, just don't tell me you didn't have a good time. But let people know about your show and how they can support and get behind you.
Yeah, so my Twitter is there. ATOKers 5. And yeah, we have a show. Me and a couple other guys on Twitter, Boxing Journals and Boxing Fan, goes out usually twice a week. One episode usually on a Sunday or Monday night. One episode usually on a Wednesday or Thursday. A lot of, I think we try and miss the big conversations that aren't that relevant, like who's the face of boxing and all this rubbish that just doesn't actually matter that much. And yeah, it's I really enjoyed the show. It's really fun doing it, and yeah, it's Championship Rounds podcast. If you go onto our Twitter or my Twitter, the @ for that account is in my bio and the YouTube link, and it's on Spotify as well. And yeah, I enjoy it. It's fun. I've enjoyed this show as well. It's been fun.
Well, I mean, just keep doing it, because the thing I like is you're knowledgeable and you have opinions that make sense, and that's helpful in boxing when people create stuff and it makes sense and it's based in reality. I'm very appreciative of it, and I think it's fun that you're getting going. And don't be afraid of making mistakes here and there, but just keep going. And I also want to say shout out to Champy. No one got more dog than Lukey, and you're darn right. Anyways, that is our episode. Next week we will be back. I will have another fill-in guest. I don't know who, but you will have to wait and see. Thank you so much, Mr. A at Tokers5. I think that you're definitely probably like this era's smartest guy in the room boxing account as of right now. Like I think you have that title. So really good follow, and it seems like you watch everything. You're my go-to if I'm like going to a restaurant or something and I don't know what's going on. I'm always going to Boxing Scene, and I'm kind of checking your Twitter feed to see what are some of your hot takes, because I feel like I might not always agree, but it's based in reality. So I think it's cool for people that listen to me to check out what you're doing. Not that you need that, because I think you got a real strong boxing eye going.
Yeah, thank you for that, man. Thank you.
Okay. So Venmo, I'll tell you off the stream. Okay. So I'll give you that.